Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear students. So today we will start with class number 4, titled Critical Realistic Period, that extends from the mid and up to late of the 19th century. In this class, we will talk about the Victorian Age. We will have a background about this Victorian Age in order to give you a sense of what was going on at that time. Then we will move to talk about poetry and the characteristics of poetry in that time. We will focus on three poets of that period. Those are Alfred, Lord Tennyson, and Matthew Arnold, and Thomas Hardy. Okay, so this is Victoria, Queen Victoria, whose the age is named after her name. Okay, so what is meant by the Victorian Age? The Victorian era in British history, which is the period between approximately 1820 and 1914, corresponding roughly but not exactly to the period of Queen Victoria's reign from 1837 to 1901, and characterized by a class-based society. So we have classes in the society. A growing number of people are able to vote, a growing state and economy, and Britain's status as the most powerful empire in the world. So I think this age is a very excellent age for Britain. Now let's come to the Victorian poetry. The Victorian poetry refers to the verses composed during the reign of Queen Victoria in English between 1837 and 1901. This period was marked by tremendous cultural upheaval. So definitely there was a prosperity at the economic level. So definitely at the cultural level also there will be development and changes. There were a drastic change and development in the form of literature, art, and music. Although Victorian poetry was quite different from that of the preceding era, yet there were some similarities that existed between the two periods. So never think that when we talk about a new age or a new school of literature, that means the previous one has completely disappeared. No. Definitely there will be some similarities and differences. So some of those similarities between Romanticism and the Victorian poetry, questioning the established rule of church. So this issue continued to exist after the Romanticism. Interest in myth and mysteries, okay, and skepticism and doubtfulness. That do you remember when we talked about some of our like Coleridge? He became atheist, and Wordsworth for some time he became pantheist. So the idea of getting skeptic about the religious values, the social values, the political values continued during the Victorian Age. Now let's come to the characteristics of the Victorian poetry. The first characteristic is realism. Now the Victorian poetry was quite realistic in nature and quite less idealized as compared to the Romantic poets, who were idealists and believed in art for the art's sake. Nature, that was everything for the Romantics, lost that idealized position in the Victorian era and became just a source of leisure and inspiration for the poets. So now the poets from the Victorian era stop to believe that nature is everything, and if you want to learn something, go to the nature. If you are in pain, go to the nature. If you want to get rid of this social corruption around you, go to the nature. Yes, nature is a source of leisure, source of inspiration, source of happiness, but it's not everything. Okay, because you have to be more realistic. Now, the focus on masses. What do you mean by focus on masses? Now, Romantic poetry mainly focused on rural and rustic life. It is no way related to city life. Do you remember An Ode to a Nightingale, The Lamb, also for Wordsworth, all the fine. Okay, when we talked about, yes, so correct. When we talked about William Blake, William Wordsworth, Samuel Coleridge, and the others, actually, those romantic people or poets, they went back to the nature. They focused on the rural life as a source of enjoyment and inspiration. But here, they never discussed the city life, except in some of their work, definitely, like Chimney Sweeper, which focuses on the exploitation of children. But in general, if you remember, we said that just a few voices actually tried to help the suppressed people. Okay, so on the other hand, Victorian poets used language as well as themes common to city life, okay, and thus wrote about the masses and for the masses. So don't hide in nature and write about natural elements and about the happiness that you gain by being in nature. No, go to the cities and look at the life of the masses, write about them and write for them. So that's why we consider the Victorian poets as more realistic, actually. Pessimism, of course, if you go to the cities and focus on the masses, definitely because of their situations, you will become pessimistic. So as already discussed, Victorians were quite realistic and thus were more concerned about the reality rather than the ideal world. And if you focus on reality, you will become pessimistic. Due to the Industrial Revolution, do you remember when we talked about Industrial Revolution in 1750s and how it actually created the working classes, those who suffered a lot? So, due to the Industrial Revolution and advancement in science and technology, there was a drastic increase in the city population that gave rise to slums, poverty, unemployment, corruption, diseases, and deaths. The population, if you remember, we said that Britain, it changed from agricultural to industrial society. So, the farmers in the villages and the countryside people left their farms and traveled to the city to find jobs. But actually, because of that massive number of people pouring to the city, that actually led to poverty and employment. Definitely that led also to diseases and deaths because of spread of diseases at that time. Now, questioning to God. It was an important feature of Victorian poetry, the development of empirical science. Rationalism and radicalism led the people to give up religious thoughts and be more skeptic. Okay? So as long there is empirical science, it means that everything, okay, should be explained scientifically. If there is something spiritual, we don't believe in it, okay? And that's connected with rationalism, العقلانية, radicalism, الحركة الراديكالية, للتغيير الجذري في التفكير. So all that encouraged people to become skeptic, okay? So that made people become skeptic, as I said, and moreover, corruption in the church, not only empirical sciences, rationalism and radicalism, but actually also corruption in the church, defining the morality of priests, okay, etc., also led the people to question the religious institutions. Okay. Sense of responsibility. Now, the Romantics believed in return in nature or to nature. A number of the Romantics did not like the city life, and instead of giving voice to the victims of industrialization, they left the city life. On the other hand, Victoria poets took the responsibility of social reform and gave voice to the commoners by living with them. Okay, great. So the romantic poets, they knew or noticed the subjugation or let's say the ill-treatment of the working classes and how they were suppressed and exploited. But many of them, if you remember, go back to our previous class, we said that only a few voices, okay, tried to speak on the behalf of the marginalized classes. But with the Victorian poets, no. Actually, they took the responsibility to speak or to give voice to the victims by living with them. So they didn't escape to the nature. They continued to live in the city and to observe the life of the city people and how they suffered in that city. Morality. So though morality saw a steep decline, إذن الأخلاق كان في عندهم تدهور فيها in the Victorian era, a number of poets tried to retain it by encouraging the people to be honest and noble. So the idea is that even if you are an atheist, even if you don't believe in a God, you don't believe in any religious principles that protect the weak people and encourage the strong people to help the others, still, as a human being, you have to be honest and noble in your behaviors. Okay. Interest in medieval myths and folklore. So do you remember the romantic poets? They were like objecting to the medieval period, and they jumped over them to go back to the classical, to the Old English. Now the Victorians showed great favor towards medieval literature. They loved mythical and chivalrous anecdotes of medieval knights, اللي هم الفرسان, okay, courtly love, etc. This interest is on contrary to the Romantics, as the later loved classical myths and legends. I don't know where the difference, but anyway, each group wanted to make a change in their life. Fine. Use of sensory devices and imagery. The poets of the preceding era, I mean the Romantic poets, used imagery vividly because they were describing the nature and the natural elements. So they used imagery a lot. Now, the Victorians also used sensory devices to describe the abstract scenes of chaos between religion and science. So they also continued to use the imagery and the other sensory devices. Now we will come to our first poet during this of the Victorian poets. His name is Alfred Lord Tennyson, who lived from 1809 to 1892. He was the poet of laureate during Queen Victoria's reign and remains one of the most popular British poets. So he was like يعني زي أمير الشعراء عنا. This rank, it means the highest rank, and he is connected with the royal family. In 1829, Tennyson was awarded the Chancellor's Gold Medal at Cambridge for one of his first pieces, Timbuktu, first solo collection of poems chiefly lyrical, in 1830, including Claribel and Mariana. These are two famous, actually, poems in English literature. Although decried or criticized by some critics as overly sentimental, his verse soon proved popular and brought Tennyson to the attention of well-known writers of the day, including Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Medievalism and powerful visual imagery spread in his poetry. These elements were clear in his poetry, Also, he focused or he benefited from classical mythological themes, such as in his poem Ulysses, okay, similar to the Odysseus. In Memoriam, this is a poem, okay, this is a poem, and it was written to commemorate his friend Arthur Ham Hunt, a fellow poet and student at Cambridge, after he died of a stroke at the age of 22. So today, inshallah, we will just focus on In Memoriam, okay? Of course, definitely from its title, you can guess that this is an elegy. Elegy marthiyya. Okay. So an elegy, this is In Memoriam, is an elegy about the loss of his friend. The poem suggests a mind in distress over a disquieted religious imagination. The Victorians had been feeling uneasy for some time by the new ideas concerning evolution. Evolution, if you remember Darwin's theory of evolution, okay? So this theory that the universe had not been created, but that it and its inhabitants had evolved from more primitive forms, had caused much concerns in the minds of many Victorians and shaken their faith in traditionally accepted religious belief. So let me remind you of the religious belief. We believe that this universe was created by an almighty God, and that almighty God created Adam, and from Adam he created Eve, and all the human beings are sons and daughters of Adam and Eve. So from the beginning, we were created as human beings, okay? So all other creatures were created by that almighty God. Now, Darwin and his evolution theory came to say, no, there was no Adam, there was no Eve, there is no thing that is called Almighty God. But actually, we started, that the theory of the creation of Earth, that it was just a matter of dust in the space, and then that dust continued to go around a focal point and united to form the Earth, okay? And after that, on that Earth, there were like tiny or microscopic creatures that evolved to become, let's look at the sea, for example. It was like a little worm, and the worm became a fish, and the fish became an amphibians. Amphibians is the creature that can live in water and on land, and then that amphibians became like a monkey on the trees, and the monkey after that started to straighten and to stand up until it became a human being, and that human being continued to evolve to our age to have this shape, okay? So this kind of thinking made people become skeptic about the religion and the meaning of worshipping that almighty God, and many of them actually became atheists. Okay. So in poem 3, fine. So in poem 3, Tennyson's uncertainty about the mortality of the soul, his horror at the probability of there being no life after death are apparent in the poem. So for Tennyson, he was actually not happy with this idea. Some people, they were happy because they will be actually exempted from the religious conditions, from the religious duties. But for Tennyson, he had a bigger thinking. If you think that our souls will no longer exist after our death, and that when we die, we just become dust, okay, and ash, similar to the animals, so this is horrible. It means that we will see our beloved ones just once in this life, and after that we will never see them again, because we will all vanish in this galaxy. So that's why he was horrified by this idea that we will just die and disappear, and there is no heaven after that. He goes on to elaborate the idea that if there is no life beyond the grave, then the love between friends is unreal, and memories of the beloved departed can no longer exist. So he is against the idea there is no heaven after death, okay? Otherwise, all the feelings that we have today are not real. And what about the memories that we have of our beloved ones who died before us? What do they mean? It means that they can no longer exist. Why do you think about them? Okay, you keep thinking about your beloved one after they die because you believe that one day you will meet them in the heaven. But if they disappear and you will just disappear in this planet, then why to think about them? Okay, so let's come to Inmoriam. We will just take two parts from Inmoriam, Canto 7 and Canto 34, okay? Fine. So Canto 7, you have lines 165 to 176. There are three stanzas that we will talk about. So let's look at the first stanza. Okay, dark house by which once more I stand, here in the long unlovely street, doors where my heart was used to beat, so quickly waiting for a hand. So from the word once more, it means that he used to come to this house. But today, this house is dark. Okay, maybe it's because of the early morning, because he came to this house, to his friend's house in the early morning, or because this house is empty today after the death of his friend. So, Tennyson seems to be hanging around the place where his friend lived, which he characterizes as a dark house. So here in the long unlovely street, so even the street, it's empty and it's unlovely. Doors where my heart was used to beat, so as if his heart was a hand beating the doors to open. This is because of his love. This indicates his massive love to his friend. So quickly, waiting for a hand, waiting for the hand of his friend to open the door and shake hands with him. A hand that can be clasped no more. Behold me, for I can't sleep, and like a guilty thing I creep at earliest morning to the door. So the idea that this hand can no longer shake hands with him or clap. Now this idea that this person, of course the hand refers to his friend, the idea of the death of this friend makes him unable to sleep at night, and that's why in the early morning he would creep like a guilty thing, okay, in order to knock at the door and to see if his friend is really dead. So he once used to wait at that house for a hand that clasped his, but now he can't sleep and is creeping around the house in the early hours of the morning. He is not here, but far away. Okay, this is an indication of his death. The noise of life begins again. Now, because the people wake up and the street is coming to life, and ghastly through the drizzling rain. Ghastly through the drizzling rain. So it's raining. On the bold street breaks the blank day. So even the day is blank, ghastly, drizzling rain, blank. All these words actually indicates depression and sadness. Even though the neighborhood wakes up around him, the speaker sees the breaking day as ghastly and blank because of the drizzling rain, which makes the scene get more depressing. Okay, now let's come to Cant 34. My own dim life should teach me this, that life shall live for evermore. Else earth is darkness at the core, and dust and ashes all that is. So now he is discussing the idea of death and heaven after death, or no heaven after death. So the speaker is now starting to struggle again with the issue of what meaning there is for man if there is no immortality at the end. Yes, what's the meaning of our existence? So the speaker is now starting to struggle again with the issue of what meaning there is for man if there is no immortality at the end, if there is no heaven to live in. Tennyson presents this emptiness as darkness at the core of earth. إذا ما فيش خلود بعد الموت في الجنة، إذا معنى هيك إنه قلب الأرض هو فقط معتم. Okay? And dust and ashes all that is. ومكونة فقط حياتنا من تراب و ashes. This round of a green, this orb of a flame, fantastic beauty such as larks, in some wild poet when he works without a conscience or an aim. He describes the world as being beautiful, round of a green, so this is the earth, orb of a flame, the sun, fantastic beauty, but a sort of random beauty, okay, that might be created by a wild poet. So in some wild poet when he works, so if there is no immortality after death, if there is no heaven, so all this beauty of our world is just maybe a creation of a wild poet. So it is not real. It is not real. Okay? So without a conscience, when he works without a conscience or an aim, yani it's just like random, because when he works without a conscience, it means that this is random work, okay, or aimless work of the poet. If there isn't a God, then who created the whole world? Could these beautiful views be just beautiful descriptions from a wild poet and not a real word? Okay. So what then were God to such as I? 'Twere hardly worth my while to choose of things all mortal, or to use a little patience ere I die. 'Twere best at once to sink to peace, like birds the charming serpent draws. The charming serpent here, it's a snake that actually attracts the birds, okay, tempting them, and then it swallow them. To drop head foremost in the jaws of vacant darkness and to seize. So if this is the case, it's better for Tennyson to just go ahead and die like a bird when a snake charms it into its clutches. Cheery. Okay. In poem 7, the poet, so let's go back to a quick analysis for them. So in poem 7, the poet persists in indulging him melancholy, and so creeps like a guilty thing at early morning to the door of the house in London where Ham had lived, but this only serves to remind him that he is not here, but far away. So he would go to the house to find his friend, but then he finds the house dark and empty, which reminds him that his friend had already died. The revival of busy movement, too, on a wet morning in the long unlovely street is vividly described. Yes, this is an imagery. The noise of life begins again, and ghastly through the drizzling rain on the bold street breaks the blank day. His description makes the situation more depressing. In poem 34, Tennyson's uncertainty about the immortality of the soul, his horror at the probability of there being no life after death is apparent in the poem. He goes on to elaborate that if there is no life beyond the grave, then the love between friends is unreal, and memories of the beloved departed can no longer exist. Moreover, his own dim consciousness should teach him thus much, that life will never be extinguished. Else all here is but dust and ashes. The earth, this round of a grief, the sun, this orb of a flame, are but fantastic beauty, such as a wild poet might invent, who has neither conscience nor aim. Even God, this is the stanza that we haven't described there, even God can be nothing to the writer if all around him is doomed to perish. Yeah, what's the purpose? If you as a God, for example, if the God creates all this world, but after death there is no hell or heaven, then the God itself shouldn't exist. So, and he will not himself wait in patience, but rather sink to peace. إذن هو كمان الشاعر لا يستنى يروح يموت أحسن. And that's why actually some people would commit suicide because of this. And like the birds that are charmed by the serpent into its mouth, he will drop head foremost in the jaws of vacant darkness, and so cease to exist. إذن يروح يموت وينتقل للظلام ويتوقف عن الوجود. إذا ما فيش إله وما فيش جنة بعد الموت وما فيش خلود. Inmoriam connects the despair Tennyson felt over the loss of his friend Arthur Ham and the despair he felt when contemplating a godless world. In the end, the poem affirms both religious faith and faith in human progress. This is in other stanzas actually, in which he declares that the religious faith doesn't contradict with faith in human progress. Both of them should exist in this life. Okay, now I will stop here for this part and we will continue with part 2. Thank you very much.